welcome you to the Planting for Wildlife and Leaving the Leaves. Phyllis is out of town, so I'm filling in, so sorry about that. I'm Christy Parrish, and Linda Knoll, she's running around. JT does all the sound system. So we're going to have a wildlife meadow and butterfly garden at the dragline, if we ever get it, which we hope it'll be here before the end of the year, and then they'll start on that. The Kansas Wildlife is helping to create the wildlife meadow, and Peyton's potting shed, which she did a exhibit not too long ago, is donating her services and plans to create the butterfly garden. With that in mind, we thought it would be interesting to learn about the effect these areas will have on our local wildlife. Jennifer was kind and willing to present today's program. She will share information on plants that help attract wildlife, and we will learn about the benefit of leaving the leaves. Once again, welcome to this special program, and I'd like to welcome Jennifer Rader, and she's from Southeast Kansas Nature Center, and she's director from Galena.
Should be good to go. Hopefully everybody can hear me okay. So, all right, well, thank you guys so much for having me. And again, my name is Jennifer Rader, or Jen, and my background is in biodiversity and conservation. So we're going to talk a little bit about biodiversity, but I help run the Southeast Kansas Nature Center, which is down in Schermerhorn Park. And this is kind of a perfect time of year to talk about this as the leaves are starting to change. So what we're going to talk about is briefly why we want to plant native and how that can help, and then what you guys can do to just kind of change your behaviors a little bit to provide habitat that's most likely been lost. So, and I want to really quickly to point out the picture up here. This is not a great photo by any means because I took it myself, and I actually think I did this on my phone. But this is part of my wildflower garden beds, and I never clean them out, and this is one of the good reasons why. Unfortunately, in my yard I have lots of neighborhood cats. We have a leash law. They're not supposed to be there, but nobody does anything about them. So I don't put a lot of bird food out because I don't want to have animals get killed by the cats that are in our neighborhood, but they still have a food source available because I leave my coneflowers, and we'll come back to this later, but this is just one example of why we want to not necessarily clean up our flower beds at the end of their flowering time. So, but why do we want to plant native? Well, first and foremost, native plants, they co-evolved with all of our wildlife. So they actually have been together for millennia, and they adapt for that. And the fact that we have plants that are adapted for our local climates is a huge deal as well, because just one thing in particular is it helps us conserve water. So if you think about when you're planting your plants in your gardens and you get these exotic species, a lot of the stuff that we get are tropical and they need constant attention. So planting native is huge in that once you get it established, you really don't have to take care of it. So that's a really important thing to consider. And of course, these plants can handle the periods of drought and heavy rain that we see. So like right now where I grew up in central Kansas, they just had 4 inches of rain that they really weren't expecting. And they need it, but it's caused problems. But that area, it's able to take care of that if they've got a nice kind of established locations that can retain or keep that water in because it's planted native. So areas where you see a lot of the problems are ag fields and things like that. Those flood out much quicker, and that's because we've removed that native habitat, native plants, and then we've put in something that doesn't typically grow there. So another thing that's important is when you plant native stuff, it can reduce the maintenance that you have to do. So, you know, certain things, like I love petunias, and I always have petunias, but in order for those to do well, you have to really baby them. They need a lot of extra nutrients because they can kind of overdo it in their small pots and things like that. You also have to take all the dead flowers off to encourage the new growth. So when you're dealing with more native things, you have less cost and less maintenance and less time into it. So, and another thing that is really important is that it is an essential habitat and food source for a lot of our native species. So, and we're going to delve into that, but again, that's part of why, you know, coneflower is such a cool plant in and of itself. Most of us are really familiar with it. This one in particular, it's famous. It's the echinacea, so it's the one that people would have used to numb you know, their mouth if they needed to get a tooth out, those kinds of things that have medicinal properties, but it is such an important food source. It's used by caterpillars, it's used by nectar drinking animals, and then of course lots of critters eat the seeds. And then if you leave stands of it, it actually makes nice little habitat that can protect animals that are small in the wintertime. So another really important thing about having a nice diversity of life in your areas is it improves our soil health. And so without getting way into the weeds with things, if we have really healthy soil, that actually helps create more clouds that can produce precipitation. So when we put a lot of chemicals and take a lot of biodiversity out of our soil, we actually can contribute to the drought that's going on. So, but to have more drought-resistant plants, to have soil that can retain water better, it can produce more varieties of plants, and it attracts more different species. And then of course it can reduce our flood risk, because one of the things about all of our native plants, they are adapted for the prairies, and they have super deep root systems, so they can get those water tables that are really not someplace that humans as we speak now can get to without lots of special equipment. So because of that, they can help protect from flooding because the root systems keep all of that soil together. So there's a whole lot of things going on, and a lot of you probably are already familiar with that. That's why we're not going into a lot of detail with it, but just kind of reiterating why the native stuff is the way to go, because it's a lot less work and less cost overall. And then lastly, we want that biodiversity. And the reason for that is basically if you take this bird right here for an example. Hi there. Let's see, I recognize Mavis. So, but if we take a look at this bird here, if you can imagine if every single bird that exists ate the exact same thing, there's going to be problems with that because of food availability, number one. So the whole point of us wanting to have different types of food available is to attract different animals, and then we don't have basically what amounts to a lack of resources. So the whole point in biodiversity and the fact that we want it is we want to have lots of different things, eating different stuff, doing different things. They fill their own niche, and there's less competition with another species. So you can consider, like when we put in our yards and we have one species of grass, how that really knocks down the biodiversity. So a monoculture basically. And we want more than one species of plant. All right, so then why should we help wildlife in our backyards? First, I kind of want to ask too, because this is starting to bloom right now. Does anybody know what species of plant that is? Or at least the group?
Is that not mustard?
It's not mustard.
Goldenrod.
It's a goldenrod. So for folks in our field, as you guys can probably imagine, a lot of people that are not familiar with identification of different wildflowers and plants, as this gets called ragweed, and it's not. and then it immediately gets wiped out by groups of people because they think it's a plant that's causing them problems. So something else that's really important in kind of thinking about what you want to do with a pollinator garden is making sure you are learning a little bit about the species that we have, how to identify them, how they're connected with the other species. So at our park, we actually don't have this kind. We've got a couple of other that are starting to go now. But one of the biggest threats to all species, and probably is the #1 threat, is the loss or degradation of their habitat. And the reasons for it are typically our personal land use or on the industrial scale. So you think about where you grew up, there used to be maybe a pasture, and now it's been turned into an ag field for a crop. And then as things get tighter and it costs more to do this, the ag field encroaches all the way to the road. So now we've got no more habitat, it's nothing but cropland. And not all wildlife is prepared for that immediate change. So something that we can kind of think about, I guess, is when we take away the habitat to put something else in, what happens to the wildlife? You know, how are they going to get what they need to survive? So just keep that in mind as we go a little bit further here. So, and examples of types of habitat loss or degradation, and of course chemical use is a big one for a lot of our bugs. So putting herbicides, pesticides, introducing a lot of chemical fertilizers in places, you know, like thinking about urban settings and that runoff, it just causes a lot of problems. So I didn't bring one with me, but one of the things some of our ecologists study is the effects of things like a poultry farm and how close it is to a stream, and what that does to the wildlife inside of the water. So that's an example. It's ag use, but it's not what we typically think of, like crop production. The amount of nitrates and things that are getting put into the water because of poultry poop, basically, it kills off a lot of species in the water that we don't think about, and then that causes more problems as it spreads out. So other examples would be, again, like I said, removing native plant community and then putting in something else in entirely. And so what happens is wildlife is forced to find what they need to survive in places like our backyards. And if we have the ability and we're the type of person that wants to, we can actually create something for them when their habitat has been taken away. So there's a big push right now to do things like that, where basically you're making a little wildlife corridor in your yard because their surrounding habitat has been degraded or lost in some way. So, and then again, biodiversity or biological diversity is good for everything. We want as much biodiversity as possible. It's responsible for the amazing soil that we have in our great state. So we want all of those plant communities to live and die and then go back into that environment to keep creating great soil for us to grow the things we do here. So, and again, one of the main features of this talk is that you guys have the ability if you want, but we're not trying to get you to just completely change how you do a flower bed, but to basically just choose to try and make a little spot that's a little bit more wildlife friendly. So ways that we can do that, and I should have warned you guys too, we're going to try and go through these pretty quickly because I do have some information that you'll be able to take home, as well as some other fun stuff. But obviously when we plant native, and I wanted to put these up, we can help protect or help give animals and plants even a chance to make it through harsh winters. So one of the things that I put up here, these are all plants that were either at the nature center where I work or they're at my own yard. So we've got a couple of different milkweeds. There's a salvia. I think that's a cup plant or Jerusalem artichoke. I can't remember. But the important thing on all of those photos is they're not honeybees. They're our native species. And those get forgotten a lot. Honeybees are really important to our culture now, but they were not native, and they're responsible for bringing some of the diseases that have caused our native species some problems. So we want to make sure we remember to plant a variety of things and plants that will bloom different time of the year. So spring, summer, and fall. That way they have nectar sources when they need it. And things like remembering that some species we don't really like so much, like the dandelion, that's one of the first flowers that blooms and provides nectar for animals like this. So as much as we want it out of yards, it's actually a really important nectar source. So try not to get rid of those things. But again, each one of these bee species, which there's at least 2 that are the same kind, but they're one of our solitary bees. The one on the butterfly milkweed, the orange flower there, that's what some folks call a sweat bee or a cuckoo wasp. So something that we wanted to also remind folks is that wasps are amazing at pollinating, and so we want to get kind of past that spray and kill every wasp we see because they're super important pollinators. I also brought one that a lot of folks don't realize is a species of wasp, and that's the velvet ant, or what's known as the cow killer. So it's actually not an ant. It's a species of wasp, and the female is flightless. It's also got one of the worst stings of any animal in the world. So I think they're in the top 5. And part of that, they have a stinger that's actually curled up inside their bodies longer than their body is. So, but those are things that in a healthy little wildflower ecosystem, they're gonna do well. But part of this kind of change in behavior is also remembering that there's going to be animals we don't necessarily like that are going to utilize that, and try not to stop the whole process or say forget it because you don't like some of those critters. That's where we'll get into a little bit later on. You can do little patches if you want to help, but you're a little concerned about some of the species. Another little notification there too, because a lot of these plants you can get at places like Home Depot sometimes will carry some of these things, but you do have to be a little bit cautious where they've been propagated. There might be invasive species or sometimes even disease. So one of the things about all of those plants there is I did collect seeds from the wild, so they were all originally wild plants. So the one on the right is a swamp milkweed. But when we plant native too, something that you might notice is you have less non-native species that kind of take over. So perfect example that I can think of is how many people are familiar with Callery or Bradford pears?
Yes.
Okay. You ever notice that the birds that really like those are house sparrows and starlings, and those are both species that are not native. So other birds tend to not really enjoy those because caterpillars don't like them. They don't have a bunch of food on them. So there's a study that was done in Kansas City area, and over 200 types of bugs, specifically in the Lepidoptera, I think, family, they are found on the American sycamore, and there were only 2 species of caterpillars found on the Callery pear. So that gives you an example of why the planting native is such a big deal. So if you want to see more pollinators, more birds come to your yard, you want to make sure that you're getting rid of some of those non-native plant species. All right. So ways that we can help. Probably one of the hardest things for people to do, especially if they take a lot of pride in their yard, is to leave things when it starts to not look so great. So up here, it's not a great picture for how small it is in general, but basically you're looking at a little chunk of my yard that I never removed the leaves from. There's a bush there that I think was a lilac, and I haven't really babied it or anything because it was planted, and so if I wanted something to replace it, I'd probably do like a aromatic sumac or something like that. But I never removed the leaves from that location. And it's one of the cool spots where one time I came home from work and I heard rustling going on. And I was expecting like, oh, I wonder if there's a pack rat or something over there, because I've got kind of woodsy areas around my yard. And what I actually scared up was an American woodcock that was looking for worms in the leaf litter. And so I walked up and was only about 5 feet away from it and startled it, thinking I was going to startle like a pack rat or something. And it turned out it was actually a bird that was foraging because I'd left habitat. And it was late November, and these guys love to eat worms. So as it gets cold, that was really important that it had a place to forage where it could find the food it needed. So another example of things that you could do if you want it to look a little bit nicer is there are some folks that actually will collect some of their leaves and use that for their mulch instead of making or buying different kinds of mulch. Around here you want to be kind of careful with doing that with nothing but the oak leaves, because it can put a little bit too much tannin and some other stuff in your soil, so you might have to treat it. But if you have like a maple or something in your yard, those are really easy to degrade over time, and so they make a nice little loose mulch that can help protect pollinators over winter as well. And then they'll biodegrade very nicely for you later. So other things that help, the wildlife is kind of stuff you don't always think about. So in my neighborhood, I'm the only person that mows my grass 4 inches tall, and everybody else mows it all the way down to the ground. But I get baby turtles in my yard because it's a safe spot for them to lay eggs, and they're not going to, get in mowing trouble or something like that. So this is a big female 3-toed box turtle that I have been coming to my yard for the whole 13 years that I've lived there. So, and as long as she's still coming, I want to make sure that she's got places she can get to safety. And any of our neighborhood cats and dogs that are running around, they have a place to escape. So other animals that we don't necessarily think about, that one on the right is kind of hard to tell, but that's a gray tree frog. And they're a really cool species in that they can freeze most of their body. They have an antifreeze in their blood that allows them to basically brumate over winter, almost entirely frozen, and then they can thaw out in the winter and just do their thing. But in order for them to stay nice and protected over winter, they need leaf litter to hide in. So if they don't have that, then it's easy for other animals that might predate on them to find them and just snack them right up. So, and another species that in our part of Kansas is really important to have leaf litter is the eastern red bat. So, we are the furthest north part of their range where they stay and will hibernate in leaves. When you get kind of further to the north, that gets too cold, and these bats actually will go ahead and migrate to further south locations where it's a little bit warmer. But in my time at Shimmerhorn, when we get warm days on the winter, these animals will come out of the leaves they've been hibernating in and feed on bugs that are coming out on warm days. So I know here 2 years ago, I think, we had a day it was like 67 degrees on January 2nd or something, and I happened to be out at the park and there was a bat flying around. So Lots of other animals can capitalize on having some places to hide if you have a little corner of your yard where you can leave a pile of leaves. So some other ways. Providing a source of water is super important. And for certain species, like this one, I don't know if anybody here is a bird person that knows what that species is, but it's a type of warbler. And so part of the year at least, these guys need to have little bugs to munch on. That's what they're looking for. So again, having native plants, they'll come if they can find little caterpillars and other bugs that are eating on native species. But then they're really excited about having some source of water. So, and more than just birds are going to be interested in that. Our little pond at the nature center, oh my gosh, there's actually a deer that's coming through fence to get to it so they can get a drink. But the amount of birds that are coming to take baths, and as we're kind of been missing some water here lately, not getting rains for a while, they're not getting as much water and the food that they eat. So having some sort of a water source, and even if you can have like a bubbler, that makes it a little bit easier for animals to hear, that's going to be a huge attractant in and of itself. So, but this is called the yellow-rumped warbler, and basically they have a yellow patch on the back where their tail meets their body, and that's why they're named that. Yes. So as Mavis says, one of their nicknames is Butterbutt. So, and another one, of course, is try avoiding using harsh chemicals and pesticides and things if you can. Sometimes, like in our region too, I don't know about all of you, but we get hit hard with Japanese beetles sometimes, and you've got to do something to kind of get those under control, or sometimes you lose some of your plants. But you never know what other species that you don't always get to see. So this is one of our moths, the snowberry clearwing. And it's actually on a little native piece of plant there on grass.
How big are they?
So those guys with the wings out, they're like about an inch or so. We've got a field guide up here. But just lots of different things that we don't always necessarily think about. There's a whole group of bugs that mimic wasps and bees that are actually flies, and they're all still really amazing pollinators. It's just that they tend to like flowers that smell not so great. So another one, if you can do it on your property and not violate city regulations or things like that, is to have brush piles. Those are really, really important to help animals have some protection over the winter. And so an example, this is a brush pile that's right next door to me. And it'll probably stay there because nobody lives in that house. But this year, I had a brown thrasher that was using the brush pile all summer as a place to hide from any potential predators and things like that. But they also utilized it to just kind of hang out in, and nesting material. There were lots of birds and other critters that were going in and just grabbing sticks. So those are things that are very helpful. You don't have to make one this big. That is a fairly large brush pile. But if you have a little corner of your yard where you can leave things to just kind of lay out, that's a really great start to helping wildlife over winter. And then of course, logs, stumps, snags. See what happened to my photo there. So this is an example of a tree that died off, and you can't tell, but about half of the tree is actually fallen over on its own. So it's a legit snag. It's not a live tree anymore, but there's probably about 15 feet of it coming up from the ground. And once the tree gets to this stage, a lot of people are ready to get rid of those. And if, again, you can leave things like that, it's a really great place for a lot of wildlife to find what they need. So, and this is just an example again of one particular animal that was so happy when this tree died off, because it can be used for multiple things, and that was the pileated woodpecker. So that hole this pileated woodpecker dug was probably about 2.5, almost 3 feet long, but they're looking for the grubs of all of the different boring beetles and any bugs that are living underneath the bark. And when they do things like that, they create spaces for other animals to get in and utilize that as well. So another species at our park that loves this is called the broad-headed skink, and it's a type of lizard. They absolutely love getting underneath the bark of dead trees, and that's one of their favorite places to hang out. So you provide lots of habitat, and that's actually a species in Kansas that's a species in need of conservation. So all of us that live kind of on the Missouri edge, we can provide a lot of habitat for threatened and endangered species in Kansas because we just don't have as much of that habitat here. So, and again, anytime that you can leave just a little portion of your yard, just to let it be, that's some of the things that you can do to help wildlife. So, and this, I just wanted to show you guys, that's my little stand of purple coneflower, and it's actually about twice as long as that, so we're talking about a little section that's like 2 feet wide and 6 feet long, and it's nothing but coneflower, and then there's a couple of things that come up from whoever lived there before, but that is just the hot spot of my yard when all of that stuff comes up. I've got butterfly milkweed on either side, and I've tried doing other things, but the echinacea does really well. And then when it gets to be this time of year, I just let it go. So I just let it do its thing, and it gets reseeded. I have not had to plant that. This is going on 9 years that I haven't touched it. I don't water them, I don't do anything to them, and there's the most amount of bugs and birds, and I have lizards and things that take shelter underneath it, and they always have food sources, so it's just an example of what it can look like. And of course you can get really cute with your little spaces too. This one, these people made it kind of in a heart shape, and then at the end of the year they just leave it alone. So they clearly mow around everything else, but they've made a little oasis. So you can do as much or as little as you want. So, and then another thing too, if you are the type of person that lives someplace where they regulate what your yards can look like, or you just are really OCD and can't handle it looking kind of like a mess, one of the things you can do is you can go ahead and cut, but again, try and find a space in your yard that's sort of back in the corner and lay these things out. So in an example, I brought some bamboo. And so if we needed to cut this down from where it was, instead of just tossing it, throwing it in a bag, we actually just pile it up somewhere, and then you have animals like our solitary bees that use that to overwinter, lay eggs, all of that kind of thing. So, and this is, I don't recommend growing your own bamboo just because it can spread outrageously. But if you have sunflower stalks, any other kinds of bigger stems of plants that, especially when they get hollow, that's a really important place for a lot of our pollinators to overwinter. So, and then of course, don't forget that there are more than just the flowering plants like our forbs. Look at bushes, look at trees and things like that too. So this is a bumblebee that we got a photo of on one of our eastern redbuds out at the park. So all of those things are really important to a lot of different species and attract them, and they can be used multiple times in the year. And if you're into foraging for yourself at all, that's some of the cool things about our native species too. Those are edible, so every spring we teach becoming an outdoors woman at an event, and we always have some ladies that do jam or jelly made from the petals of redbuds. So they taste kind of sweet. So what I have up here, before I move on to the next slide, is just a couple of other things. Basically, we didn't want to spend too much time, but we've got some resources for you, some examples too of some other critters that we get in this region. So an example, this here is a cecropia moth. Some of you may have seen those in your neighborhoods before, but they need a little bit of leaf litter to protect their cocoons. And so when I find these in the wild, typically they're not as clean as this, but a lot of times they've been wrapped up in a leaf too. And so when we get really quick to toss everything over and burn it or something like that, we might actually be getting rid of a lot of the next generation of our pollinators and things. So it's just something else to remember too. So we've got that one, or many of you are probably familiar with the Luna moth as well, so I've got one of those. And every year we get those on our building out at the Nature Center. Another thing, this one isn't broken, but we use these as little spots for either solitary bees. You can actually bury part of this or most of it in the ground and leave no leaves, leave some bare soil on top, and it's a place for them to enter the ground and make their nests in the ground. Or you can kind of do it sideways, and we make toad abodes. So it's basically a spot where your frogs and toads can get out of the sun, retain a little bit more moisture. So that's actually what this one was done, so you can see where it was in the ground. But if you have lots of broken pots and things like that, that's actually a way that you can utilize those things to still help wildlife. So, and then we just have a few other items. I should have enough for everybody to take one of these home, but this is going to give you some websites that give you a little more information on how you can basically kind of winterize a pollinator garden to attract wildlife. One of the things I didn't get to do, which I was telling the ladies before, we've had internet problems at work, so getting all of my information off the internet, I didn't get as much as I wanted, but one of our publications we put out back in, I think, 2016 had to do with pollinators, and so this is available on our agency's website, and it's got a nice little list in here, and you might recognize some of these kinds of things with pollinator-friendly practices, but it's got suggestions for different plantings that you can do so that you've got nectar sources or host plants available for pollinators throughout the warm months of the year. And then I've also got wildflower seed packet for everybody to go home with today. So, otherwise, wanted to make sure if you guys have any questions that we have plenty of time to ask a little bit about that, and so folks have a chance to look at things up here. One of the things that I will say about our wildflower seed packet, and I brought a poster for the museum if they want to keep that. This is part of our chickadee checkoff program through Kansas Department of Wildlife and Parks. So you as a Kansas resident, if you want, you can actually donate to this when you do your taxes, and it goes to all non-game species. So if anybody's ever seen the little pocket guides that our agency has put out with a little bit of information about native animals and plants, the money came from that fund. The wildflower seed packets you guys are going to get to take home came from the chickadee checkoff. I didn't bring my card today, but the license plates that our agency has, the chickadee one goes to the chickadee checkoff program. So, and it creates either education resources or it goes to actually funding projects related to those non-game species. So if we have, in this example, especially since they're a candidate for federal listing, the Monarch, we can put chickadee checkoff funds to Monarch projects in the state of Kansas. So, other than that, that's my information up there. And I've got my card here, and like I said, we want you guys to look at a couple of other resources, and please take these with you. Like I said, they're just little tips and things to help change your behavior a little bit to provide some more habitat in pollinator gardens. So, yes, me.
Okay, I've tried several times to plant different kinds of milkweed, and I'm not having success. Which kind do you suggest?
So, first and foremost, and that's again one of the things that I didn't get on here, is sometimes connecting with your extension agent, they can help you a little bit with your soil situation, and if there's anything going on with your soil that's keeping it. So, some of it too depends on if you're trying to plant a milkweed that actually does better in the arid western part of the state, when you should be doing one that's more localized. So, do you know what species of?
I tried to do swamp.
Okay, so swamp is kind of finicky too, and like when I've planted them, they always end up dying after 5 or 6 years, and you just have to keep repropagating. And these, I think, they've got, they have common, butterfly, and I think they used to have swamp. This one doesn't. So, but looking at your soil for your region, and then just making sure you're grabbing a type that was grown in the same two. You're putting them from seed and not replanting. Okay. So, and then that's something else. Every time I've done any type of milkweed from seed, it takes about 4 years before it will bloom. So you have to give it that time to get that far.
They eat it way before. I have a single first year common milkweed coming up with plants this big, and they're now denuded totally from monarch caterpillars. I mean, so the monarchs will find them even before they bloom. And if there's enough around for them to justify laying eggs, they will.
Yeah, and that's
and they stay alive. They're already starting to regrow where they've been stripped.
Mm-hmm. So, but you also want to pay attention if you have planted anything else nearby that will change the chemicals in the soil. So some of the plants that we plant nearby, they actually put chemicals in the ground to prevent other plants from growing well next door. So there are things like that that you want to kind of pay attention to too. And I'm trying to think right off the bat. We're just talking about a plant that does that, now it escapes my mind, but it's one that's really popular that people will put out. Oh, I know, somebody that was collecting crab apples to make jelly, they found some other plant, and it's, I think they call it autumn olive. Ooh. And it's a really popular, I think it's Japanese, it's an Asian species that's really popular in urban settings. And it looks pretty, it puts off these really neat berries, but it puts out a chemical that prevents other plants from doing very well next to it.
Plus it's invasive, and we have no natural, it has no real natural
yeah. If you can plant a native, then, you know, sandhill plum or, you know, something like that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've had the echinacea growing for several years, and last year, maybe the year before, this orange stringy thing started working its way around it. I found out it's called dodder.
Yeah, I was gonna say, you have really wet soil if you got dodder growing and taking over.
Well, I mean, this year, I mean, it's been dry, but, okay, so how does one prevent that? And, now that I have it, what can I do to get rid of it?
So-
Is that native? Is that daughter native?
Yeah, that one I'd have to go back and look up. It likes wet soil. So one of the things sometimes that you can do in scenarios like that is if you can do a raised bed and kind of get it off of the ground and get a little bit more aeration in between. But those would be questions too that you might check with your extension agents on,
Yeah.
because they have more expertise specifically with that.
He said just cover it up.
Yeah,
Let
and
it grow. I mean, just part of
and
the lawn.
that's one of the, I was gonna say that's one of the things they might tell you
Yeah.
is that it kind of does its own thing, but in general, it's not as bad as some of the others. You know, like getting some of our other invasives like honeysuckle. One of the ones I just had, it's actually was brought in by a deer herd that comes to my yard, and I have this cucumber vine that's an Asian species, and the little cucumbers are about the size of a marble, but they ate it somewhere and then pooped it behind my house, and then I looked behind my house and I was like, whoa, we've got this crazy vine I've never seen before. And so I just went through and cut where I could see it, and it hasn't really grown back because of the heat we had this summer, but just kind of keeping an eye on those things, and I haven't had to.
Cucumber vine?
Yeah, it's an Asian species of some sort.
So they eat it.
You said nothing about pine needles.
Because
And I have a couple
pines
of
aren't
pine
native
trees
to
that-
Kansas.
Well, that's why I wanna ask, that they drop needles every
Mhm.
year, and what should be done there?
Well, number one, you want to check with the Kansas Forestry to make sure you don't have pine wilt. So if you're losing lots of pine needles and
Well,
it's
they just
turning
know
brown.
they're healthy, but they
Yeah.
drop so many needles every year.
Yeah, and that's just one of the things with those types of trees. That's how they protect themselves from getting crowded out, is what the oils that are in all of our pines and cedars and that kind of thing. But yeah, I didn't cover it because pines are not native to
Well,
They
Kansas.
use
But
it
should
for
I-
mulch. They use it for mulch in the south.
Uh-huh.
Should I just leave it as
If
they
it's,
fall?
yeah, if it's not interfering with any other planting you're doing, then you should be okay. And again, mainly you're gonna have other smaller animals that will lay eggs and stuff in underneath all of that.
Okay, and my
So-
other question is your brush pile,
Yeah.
that needs to be left year round, you don't clean it up once a
Right.
year, right? And
Yeah,
another-
not everybody, like I said, not everybody can do that.
Another observation was made in one of our groups earlier this week, is the loss of hedgerows in Kansas for planting. They used to have hedgerows because of soil erosion, and now we've got less and less hedgerows, and that was one of the main, I hear, habitats for many of them, right?
Yeah, for some of it, but when you get into it, kind of depends on what species they used. So with humans out in western Kansas, they started making their hedgerows all with the eastern red cedar, which is highly problematic for the prairie ecosystem. And so if you're doing Osage orange, that was native
That's what
to
we
the
did.
area. I think what's happening with that is a lot of people just get tired of having to cut it because it's a really hard wood, and it's really hard on your equipment. And if you have a whole fence line of it and you need to get it out of a fence line, it's, I'd have to look into more of any problems specifically with Kansas, but some of it's just current practices. They just don't care or need it anymore. And then some of the hedgerow stuff, when we think about it, those are naturally put in because of birds that sit on fence lines and they poop seeds out. And then they're growing entire hedges of various things.
Yeah, I was talking more about the ones that ran across fields that they planted.
Yeah, and some of that, without talking to individual landowners, I don't know why they're doing all of it. Some like I said, in the West, it's the big concern with woody encroachment and that we're losing our grassland because we're letting all of that. When we get this direction, You know, some people are taking that out because they can't afford to farm what they were. They have to go all the way to a road now. So there's a lot of those kinds of things that it's, you know, kind of nuanced, but yeah, I'd have to look into that more specifically. And we do programming, it's a little bit more with the wildlife and less with the land ag use.
Yeah, I
so-
just didn't know how much wildlife was affected by the, lived.
Well, if
and
you
took.
think about, so especially if anybody here's into upland hunting and things like that, you lose your habitat for them to hide from
For the
predators.
quail.
Yep, so quail don't have places to hide, those kinds of things.
So you mentioned the Bradford pear, and I just want to take the opportunity to pile on against the Bradford pear and the Collier pear and what
And
they're
all
doing.
the other bajillion
Yeah, and I was
special
hoping you'd
names they
chime
call
in
it.
and help me bash the Bradford pear. In Pittsburgh, if you go out east on Free King Highway up north, up near Schooler Grain, up in that area, you go back in, there are all kinds of these Bradford pears and the Collier pears, and they've now, the Bradford was supposed to be sterile, somehow it didn't reproduce, and they are reproducing, and they have big thorns, and they're invasive, and they can't get rid of them, and
Well, and the problem now is any place that does tree nursery of any kind, they've got so many other cultivars that they've called something else. It's some sort of fancy pear, but every single one of them are a type of Bradford pear.
That's why that's why they're reproducing. They've created so many versions of it, and suddenly they're not sterile anymore. They start hybridizing with each other in the wild, and then you have pears.
Yeah,
Grapes,
I
the
can't.
fruit.
so has
Originally,
there been any move to call them an invasive, get rid of them, do something to
is it
control them?
Kansas forestry?
Kansas Forestry's trying to work on things right now. It's
You
only
take one out,
feasible
they'll give
at
you
county
three.
level. So typically, Shawnee County around Topeka has
And then you
a
also
program,
mentioned there's
and then
wild,
Kansas City area.
and then there's certain problems that propagate in the plants that are there now, because they're Bradford pears, you were mentioning some sort of
Well, because they're not a native species, our native wildlife don't care about it. So it's not a host plant for a lot of species of bugs. Therefore, all kinds of other animals see no need to utilize it because they can't find
oh, so
food
it's
at
just
it.
an exclusion of habitat, then, it just takes up habitat.
Mhm. Well, and it does a very good job of starting over. So like we, at Schermerhorn Park, they've planted Bradford pears because they have a nice, pretty shape, but they're terrible trees. They don't last very long, and they don't do well in wind and things like that. And one of the Bradford pears at our park, it's active and puts off fruit, and we've got little starts all over the park that I'm constantly taking down. And that's exactly what happens. It can grow faster than our native stuff, and then it takes over that space.
Do you have Bradfords on your property?
Not me,
Oh.
no,
The
no.
one thing that's easy about them is they're one of our first plants, trees that flower, so they stand out really well in the very early spring for people to go ahead and take them down.
You mentioned using the bamboo for a little habitat. What's the best way to place those around your yard? I mean, where would you put them?
With these, quite literally, if you can just stack them like so.
Stack them on something?
Yep, and
It
you,
would
if you
be-
want, you
could be
can
in
do
a
it
tree or-
higher. It could be. You could also just leave it on the ground,
Can you
almost like
bind
a
them to-
compost.
Can you bind like half a dozen
Yeah.
together?
As a matter of fact, these that we used, these I think grow at one of the schools in Galena, and they get cut down, and we make fishing poles and all kinds of stuff. And we actually would do programs with the kids where they had to time together to make rafts to float down the river because they'll float. So we had just cut a whole bunch of them, and you can string them together, or you can actually hollow out bigger pieces of wood and just stuff them inside. Little bee hotels that they make, that's basically what they are little shelves where you can put slots of lots of different plants in. So if you just have a space where you can stack things up, I'm trying to
Can
think
they
if I
be
have a.
horizontal
And you-
or vertical?
You can buy bee houses too.
Yeah,
they
most
sell.
of the time when they're bee houses, they're this direction instead of this way. Most of the bees that are interested in going down, all they want is a little bare spot of ground with no grass, and it gets sun most of the time. So if you can leave a little patch, then that might be a spot where one of our solitary species of bee, they will use that underground.
Thank you.
Yeah, and then there's kind of other random things. I brought this guy just because he's fun, and we live in a part of Kansas where we can get them. And in your little pollinator spaces, like if you guys get some of your, and he's a stinker. This was, somebody found it and forgot about it on a shelf. This is the Eastern Hercules beetle. So we get these in this part of the state in the summertime. And for folks that get really into putting out food for pollinators like that, when your bananas go bad and you're not going to do anything with them, you throw those out on a little tray, and animals like this love it. You're going to get lots of butterflies and things like that. So, think about, instead of throwing away some of the foods that you use, like salads and things, when they start to go bad, you can make a little compost pile in your backyard and just leave it, and all kinds of other things are going to utilize it. Yes?
Is the, I think they call it wedding lace, it's growing and blooming about now, and it grows, it's very invasive.
Are you talking about what's also known as snake root? Little tiny white flower?
And it grows over the top of trees and.
Wisteria.
Oh, so yeah, that's gonna be a
Clematis.
non-native, and
that
it could be like a
Virgin
wisteria.
flower, that virgin flower that's blooming now.
Some of
There's
the,
clematis.
I'm not familiar with some of the nicknames for some of those, so I'd have to look up, but
Something lace.
It's listed as native in my book, but it's everywhere.
oh, well, and Queen Anne's lace, that's not something that's gonna go vine. It's a member of the parsley or carrot family. And so it's common in ditches and things. You just have to be careful with stuff like that. Like right now, and I don't know if you can see it very well in this photo, right here,
At the bottom, yeah.
this little tiny flower. I'm not sure if that might be what you're talking about, but another name for that is snake root. And it's really popular with plants, with pollinators, but it's what you get the milk poison from. So what killed, was it Abraham Lincoln's mother, I believe. She drank milk from a cow that had eaten snake root, and it's
Really?
very toxic.
So
And it takes over my flower bed.
So what you see when you drive anytime this time of year on everything, I call
This would
clematis.
be,
No,
no,
it's
this,
on the ground.
yeah, this
No,
is
I'm
only
talking
gonna
about,
be
but
on
what do
the
you call
ground.
the stuff that's
That's
hanging in the
virgin
trees
flower.
and bushes?
Virgin flower,
There's,
or Chinese
there's
lemon.
way too many, could be kudzu, it could be a honeysuckle, there's so many non-natives that could be climbing all over everything.
Even this
So
time
I'd
of
have
year.
to actually see a photo or something.
Just go down the bypass and filter there.
Where it's everywhere.
That's virgin
I'd have to
flower.
look, so, like I said, another, all of the asters are starting to bloom right now too. So, and of course, those are members of the sunflower family, which this one technically is too. It's just, it can take over flower beds, but. Were you finding something?
Well, because I see it every year here.
Yeah, and it says clematis virgin.
It's a version of clematis, but
Yeah.
Yeah.
our the localish name is.
So, and one of the things, especially in these urban communities, or when you go through and drive the country and you see the old homesteads, I mean, we make our mark on everything and we plant a lot of stuff that wasn't native. So, go to campus, like I went to Fort Hays. We have all kinds of things that they've grown on the campus tree-wise that those are not Western Kansas at all, not even native to North America. So there's a lot of those things that can take over. But yeah, I'd have to look a little bit more closely to get an idea of what you guys were talking about specifically.
Yeah, that's good.
It's a sort of clematis, but it's called Virgin's Bower, and it's everywhere around here.
Yeah.
At the moment, it's blooming.
Well,
We
everybody
don't
we
see it
grew up
down there.
around here called it clematis or clematis, whatever.
Yeah, and where I grew up, we don't have that at all until you get to the Rock Springs campus, actually, where I'm going to be this coming week.
I never saw it around Kansas City. I see it now that I'm in southeast Kansas.
Yes. So, and there's a lot of things like that that, you know, just kind of moved. Yeah, no.
And you're in the
So
Ozarks,
those are
basically,
bushes,
so it's different.
if I remember correctly.
They're vines. They vine over
Okay.
everything.
Like I said, we don't have them really in Galena like that. So it's one of those
Really?
things, but like the community I grew up in, it's got the worst bindweed I've ever seen in my life. Except for Junction City, Kansas. For some reason, that city, and I don't know if it has to do with when they put in all of their grasses in town, almost everybody's got crabgrass. And it does really, bindweed and crabgrass do really well together.
That's great, yeah.
But you know, to be in a little tiny town of less than 1,000 and everybody's yards are just inundated with bindweed. And then you go outside of town and you really don't see it. So just kind of one of those
Here,
things
it's morning
that,
glories. The farmers hate it because it's, you know, bindweed.
yeah, and all of it, again, very much depends. You can see kind of a stop or a go of some of this stuff when we get our droughts and then big pickup back in rain again. That's not typically normal, so. But anyways, like I said, if you guys have any other questions, I'm here as long as you want me, and want to make sure that everybody gets up to get at least a list like this. Doesn't have information on like our Kansas forestry and things like that, but this is going to specifically be a little bit more about planting for wildlife and what you can do to change some of your gardening habits for in the winter, if you want to change that up a little bit. And then we've got these. I don't have a whole bunch of copies of these, but if anybody is interested, we can get you a website. If I didn't get it up, I think I did. Should be on here. Yes, right there. So, and like I said, this actually covers a little bit of the threats to pollinators. Little bit, it kind of highlights too, especially for the museum here, it highlights the importance of milkweed seeds and what those were used for, like during World War II and stuff too, so.
The Pittsburgh Public Library has a pretty cool magazine with wildflowers and how to promoting the propagation thereof.
Yes. And one of the first thing I put on here for you guys, if you're not aware of it, is the Kansas Native Plant Society. So we've got folks that they're experts in all these different critters. There's an organization for each one of them. So wanted to make sure if anybody didn't know about that one, there's a whole host of people that really know their natives that can help out if your extension agents or things like that are not as helpful for what it is you're looking for. But typically they've got a really good suite of information to provide. But otherwise, I want to thank you guys all for joining me. And like I said, got stuff that you guys are welcome to look at.
There's
Thank you, Jennifer, that was great.
Yeah.
I learned a lot.
Well,
I do not have a green thumb, so I'm really bad. So, well, thank you all for coming. I think it was really interesting. I don't have a green thumb, and so maybe I can grow native, I don't know. So we want to thank our volunteers. Linda Knoll, she's back there. JT does our sound system. Nanette was at the door, you met her. Be sure to follow us on Facebook. Everything that we do is on Facebook. All the programs. October 5th, we're having another program, and it's Beauty and the Bees, presented by Patty and Phil Street. So that'll be our next one. I think last time you were here, we said we were gonna have a 7-foot screen. We have the projector that was donated, and 2 people anonymously donated the money to buy the screen. So now we just need to get it up. So it'll be right here. November 8th is Making Spirits Bright. Don't forget that. That's our next event. And I think that's it. So thanks for coming. We have refreshments, and you can stay and talk to Jennifer.
With some spaces like that.
Thank you. I got.
Oh, you got a wildlife habitat. So you're very welcome. So there's different